Sometimes the smallest object carries the biggest secret. I never thought much about the necklace. That probably sounds strange considering I wore it every single day of my life. The silver chain rested against my skin from the time I was old enough to remember. It appeared in childhood photographs, school pictures, graduation pictures. Every version of me seemed to include that necklace. Yet I never questioned it. The truth was simple. Nobody had answers. The woman who raised me always said it came with me. That was her exact phrase. Came with you. Not that she bought it. Not that it belonged to a relative. Just that it came with me. As a child, I accepted that explanation. As an adult, I stopped asking. Life was busy enough without chasing mysteries. Most days were predictable. I worked at the Boston Community Library. I helped visitors find books, organized events, and spent far too much time convincing children that reading was not a punishment. It was not a glamorous life, but it was mine, and I liked it. On the morning everything changed, I almost stayed home. A cold rain covered the city. Gray clouds hung low over Boston Harbor. The kind of weather that made people cancel plans and order coffee twice. By 6 o'clock that evening, I found myself standing inside a historic ballroom near downtown Boston for a community fundraising event. The library had partnered with several local organizations. Attendance was important. So there I was, smiling, making conversation, pretending my feet did not hurt. Crystal chandeliers glowed overhead. Soft music drifted through the room. Wealthy donors moved between tables carrying glasses of sparkling water and discussing charitable projects. Everything felt polished, elegant, predictable. I was helping arrange auction materials near the stage when my necklace slipped from beneath the collar of my dress. The silver pendant caught the light. I barely noticed. Someone else did. Across the room, a man stopped walking. Completely stopped. Conversations continued around him. Servers carried trays through the crowd. Music played. Yet for a brief moment he seemed frozen in place. His eyes remained fixed on the necklace. Not on me. On the necklace. I did not know his name then. I only noticed him because people noticed him. Tall. Impeccably dressed. Calm in the way powerful people often are. Several guests greeted him as he moved through the ballroom. He acknowledged them politely without taking his attention away from me for very long. The entire thing lasted only seconds. Then he looked away. I returned to work and forgot about it. At least I tried to. Later that evening, I found myself near one of the display tables reviewing donation forms. Excuse me. The voice was deep and controlled. I turned. The same man stood beside me. Close, he looked older than I first thought. Early 40s. Dark hair touched slightly by silver. Sharp green eyes. There was something unsettling about the way he studied people. Not threatening. Just observant. Can I help you? I asked. His gaze dropped briefly toward the necklace. That pendant. My fingers instinctively touched it. What about it? For the first time, something changed in his expression. Not surprise. Not exactly. Something deeper. Older. Like a memory suddenly waking up after years of silence. Where did you get it? He asked quietly. I laughed. I wish I knew. The answer seemed to affect him more than it should have. The room continued moving around us. Yet an invisible tension had settled between two strangers connected by a piece of silver, neither fully understood. And somewhere behind those green eyes, I had the strange feeling that 20 years of forgotten history had just opened a door. I spent the rest of the evening pretending the conversation had not happened. It was easier that way. Easier than admitting that a stranger's reaction to an old necklace had unsettled me more than it should have. The fundraising event ended shortly after 9. Volunteers packed away decorations. Guests drifted toward waiting cars beneath the cold Boston rain. By the time I stepped outside, the streets glistened beneath rows of amber streetlights. I wrapped my coat tighter and started the walk toward the subway station. Halfway there, my fingers found the pendant resting beneath my scarf. The metal felt cool against my skin. For the first time in years, I found myself wondering where it had really come from. The question followed me home. It followed me the next morning too. The library was busy. Children filled the reading area. Parents searched for books. Retirees gathered near the newspapers. Normally, the routine helped quiet my thoughts. Not that day. Every time I caught sight of the necklace reflected in a window or computer screen, I remembered the look in the man's eyes. Recognition. That was the only word for it. Not curiosity. Recognition. Around lunchtime I called my Aunt Evelyn. She was the woman who had raised me after I was found and adopted as a small child. "Do you remember where my necklace came from?" I asked. Silence lingered on the other end of the line. "That old thing." "Yes." "Why are you asking now?" Her hesitation immediately caught my attention. "Someone asked me about it." Another pause. "Claire, I really do not know much about it. You always told me it came with me." "Because it did." Her voice softened. "When the adoption was finalized, you already had it. Was there any paperwork?" "Not that I remember." The answer felt incomplete somehow. Before I could ask another question, a patron approached the desk needing assistance. The conversation ended. Yet the feeling remained. Something was missing. That evening, several miles away, Damian Romano sat alone inside his office overlooking Boston Harbor. The city lights shimmered beyond the glass. A crystal tumbler rested untouched beside him. On the desk lay a faded photograph more than 20 years old. The image showed a smiling little girl standing beside a snow-covered fence. Around her neck hung a silver necklace. The same necklace. Damian stared at the photograph for a long time. His jaw tightened. Memories arrived in fragments. Snow falling beneath yellow streetlights. A frightened child. A promise made during a terrible night. A promise he had failed to keep. He closed his eyes briefly. 20 years. 20 years of believing the trail had ended. 20 years of carrying questions nobody could answer. Then a librarian walked into a ballroom wearing the impossible. The following afternoon I was shelving books when a shadow appeared beside me. Claire Walker. I looked up. A man in an expensive dark suit stood there holding a business card. "Yes. Mr. Romano would like to invite you to dinner." I almost laughed. "I think you have the wrong person." "I do not." He offered the card politely. Damian Romano. The name meant nothing to me. "Why?" The man hesitated. "He believes there are things about your necklace you deserve to know." My heart skipped once. Just once. Yet it was enough. As I stared at the card resting in my hand, I realized the mystery I had ignored my entire life was no longer willing to remain buried. I stared at the business card for nearly an hour before deciding to call. Common sense told me not to. Every warning instinct I possessed suggested ignoring the invitation and returning to normal life. Yet nothing about the last few days felt normal anymore. By 7 o'clock the following evening, I found myself standing outside a quiet restaurant overlooking Boston Harbor. The water reflected thousands of lights across the dark surface. Cold wind drifted in from the bay. For a moment I considered turning around. Then the door opened. "Miss Walker." A hostess smiled politely. "Mr. Romano is expecting you." Those words somehow made the situation feel even stranger. She guided me through the dining room toward a private corner table near the windows. Damian was already there. He stood when I approached. "Thank you for coming." I almost did not. A faint smile appeared. I assumed that might happen. The restaurant was elegant but surprisingly quiet. No crowd. No spectacle. Just soft lighting, distant conversations, and the harbor beyond the glass. For several moments neither of us spoke. I studied him carefully. He seemed exactly as I remembered. Calm. Controlled. Observant. The kind of person who noticed details other people missed. "You said there were things I deserved to know," I finally said. Damian's gaze shifted briefly toward the necklace resting against my collarbone. "There are." My fingers instinctively touched the pendant. "Then start talking." He leaned back slightly. 20 years ago, there was a little girl. Something in his voice changed. The words sounded personal. Heavy. "She disappeared during a winter storm." I frowned. "And this has something to do with me?" "I think it does." "Think." Not know. The distinction mattered. "What makes you think that?" Instead of answering immediately, Damian reached into the inside pocket of his coat and removed a photograph. The edges were worn with age. He placed it carefully on the table. Picked it up. My breath caught. A little girl smiled at the camera. Snow covered the ground behind her. She looked about 6 years old. maybe 7. Around her neck hung a silver necklace. My necklace. The exact same pendant. The same chain. The same design. For a second, the entire restaurant seemed to disappear. That is impossible. My voice barely emerged above a whisper. I thought so too. I stared at the photograph. Who is she? Damien's expression hardened slightly. That is the question I have been trying to answer for 20 years. The air suddenly felt colder. You knew her. His eyes remained fixed on the picture. Yes. One word. Yet it carried enough weight to fill the room. Was she family? Another pause. No, the answer surprised me. Then why have you kept this photograph all these years? Damien looked toward the harbor beyond the window. Because I made a promise to protect her. Something tightened in my chest. And his jaw shifted slightly. I failed. Silence settled between us. Not awkward silence. The kind that appears when a memory enters the room. I looked back at the photograph. The little girl seemed familiar somehow. Not because I recognized her face. Because something about the image felt strangely close. Like a dream I could almost remember. Damien. It was the first time I had spoken his name. Who was she? He met my eyes. For the first time since we met, uncertainty appeared in his expression. That is what I am trying to find out. Then he reached across the table and pointed toward the back of the photograph. Written there in faded ink were 3 words that instantly changed everything. Find Claire Walker. The words on the back of the photograph followed me home like a shadow. Find Claire Walker. I must have read them 100 times that night. The ink was faded. The paper was old. Yet the message felt impossibly direct. As if someone from 20 years ago had reached through time and left a note waiting for me. Sleep never came. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the little girl in the photograph. Her smile. The snow behind her. The necklace around her neck. My necklace. By morning, exhaustion sat behind my eyes, but so did something stronger. Curiosity. I arrived at the library early and spent the first hour pretending to organize returned books while my mind replayed every conversation from the previous week. Around noon, I called Aunt Evelyn again. This time, I did not intend to let the questions go unanswered. Claire, she said when she picked up. You sound tired. I need to ask you something. Silence. All right. When I was adopted, what was my name before Claire Walker? The pause that followed lasted too long. Why are you asking that? Because somebody showed me a photograph from 20 years ago. Another pause. Evelyn. My voice softened. Please. I heard her exhale slowly. There were gaps in the records. What does that mean? It means the information was incomplete. My grip tightened around the phone. Incomplete or hidden? This time she did not answer immediately. I never wanted you to feel different, she finally said. Different from what? Different from everyone else. The conversation ended shortly after that, but not because I wanted it to. She claimed she had another appointment. Maybe she did. Maybe she simply did not want to continue. Either way, the result was the same. More questions. That evening, Damien sat across from a long conference table inside a private office. Several folders lay open before him. Names, dates, adoption records, newspaper archives. He had spent years searching for fragments. Now those fragments were beginning to connect. One document in particular held his attention. It listed a series of records from a children's services office that no longer existed. Several pages were missing. Others had been altered. Nothing illegal. Nothing obvious. Just enough inconsistency to raise concern. He closed the file and looked toward the city skyline. The memories were becoming clearer now. Not complete, but clearer. He remembered a frightened child clutching a silver pendant. He remembered snow falling beneath streetlights. He remembered making a promise. Most of all, he remembered failing to keep it. 2 days later, I found myself standing inside the basement archive room of the library. The public rarely came down there. Old newspapers filled metal shelves stretching from floor to ceiling. Dust drifted through thin beams of light. I searched because I did not know what else to do. If someone had been looking for Claire Walker 20 years ago, maybe there would be a record somewhere. Hours passed. Most articles led nowhere. Then I found something. A small newspaper clipping dated 20 years earlier. The headline was barely 3 inches wide. Child found during winter storm. My heart began to race. The article explained that an unidentified young girl had been discovered alone during severe weather outside Boston. Authorities were unable to determine her family. Temporary guardianship had been arranged while efforts continued. The rest of the article had been damaged, torn away, missing. I stared at the page. My hands trembled slightly. I had always believed my life began with adoption, but for the first time I realized my story had started long before that. And somewhere inside those missing years, someone had been searching for me. The newspaper clipping remained folded inside my bag for 3 days before I showed it to Damien. During those 3 days I carried it everywhere. To work, home, coffee shops, even on walks through Boston Common. It felt less like a piece of paper and more like proof that my life contained chapters nobody had ever allowed me to read. Damien agreed to meet at a quiet cafe overlooking the harbor. Rain tapped softly against the windows when I arrived. He was already seated near the back. A cup of black coffee rested untouched beside him. I slid into the chair across from him and placed the clipping on the table. His eyes moved across the article. Slowly, carefully. "You found this yourself?" he asked. "In the library archives." He nodded once. Then, "You are getting closer." I leaned forward. "Closer to what?" Damien looked toward the rain beyond the glass. "The truth." I was beginning to dislike that word. Everyone seemed to have pieces of it except me. "You keep saying things like that." My voice remained calm but barely. "You know more than you are telling me." He accepted the accusation without argument. "Yes. At least he was honest." "Then tell me." For a long moment neither of us spoke. Finally, Damien reached into his coat and removed another photograph. This one was larger, clearer, newer than the first. My stomach tightened immediately. 3 people stood in the picture. A woman, a man, and a little girl wearing the silver necklace. Snow covered the ground around them. The woman had light brown hair. The same shade as mine. The same eyes too. Something about her face felt painfully familiar. Not because I remembered her. Because I saw traces of myself. "Who are they?" I whispered. "That," Damien said quietly, "is what I have spent 20 years trying to uncover." My eyes remained fixed on the photograph. "You knew them?" "Only briefly." "How briefly?" "One night." The answer surprised me. "One night." Damien nodded. "Sometimes one night changes everything." His gaze settled on the image. "They were trying to leave Boston." "Why?" I never learned the full reason. Rain continued tapping against the window. The cafe seemed quieter than before. Smaller somehow. "And the girl?" I asked. "What happened to her?" Damien looked directly at me. "She disappeared before sunrise." A chill moved through me. "You think that girl is me?" He did not answer immediately. "I think the evidence keeps pointing in that direction." I lowered my eyes to the photograph again. The necklace, the hair, the age. Every new piece seemed to fit too perfectly. Yet something still felt incomplete. "If that is true," I said softly, "why was nobody looking for me?" Damien's expression changed. Not dramatically, just enough. Someone was. The words landed heavily between us. "Who?" Instead of answering, he slid a thin folder across the table. Inside were copies of old records, newspaper notices, public requests for information, missing child reports. My hands began trembling as I turned the pages. There were dozens, maybe more. Different dates, different agencies, different years, but all connected to one little girl. The final page contained a handwritten note attached to an investigation summary. The ink had faded with time, but the message remained readable. Search suspended. Family location unknown. Child presumed unrecoverable. I stared at the sentence until the letters blurred. Somewhere in the past, someone had searched for me. Someone had refused to give up. And for the first time, I realized the mystery was larger than a necklace. Much larger. The necklace had not led Damien back to a memory. It had led both of us toward a family that might still be waiting. I did not sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the same image repeating itself. The little girl in the snow. The silver necklace around her neck. The words written in faded ink. Search suspended. Family location unknown. Child presumed unrecoverable. By morning, the world felt different in a way I could not fully explain. Even the familiar shelves of the library seemed unfamiliar, as if I was walking through a place that no longer belonged entirely to me. Around noon, I received a message from Damien. Not a call. Not an explanation. Just the location. Boston Harbor Pier 17. No time. No context. I almost did not go. Almost. But curiosity is a difficult thing to ignore once it starts growing. The pier was quiet when I arrived. Fog hovered over the water, softening the edges of everything it touched. Damien stood near the railing, looking out at the gray surface of the harbor. He did not turn immediately when I approached. You came, he said finally. I was not sure I should. But you did. I stepped closer. What is this place? Damien looked toward the water. A beginning. I frowned. A beginning of what? He turned to me then. Of the night everything changed. The wind shifted slightly, carrying cold air from the harbor. I need you to hear this, he said quietly. And I need you to listen without interrupting. Something in his tone made it impossible to argue. I nodded once. Damien. Exhaled slowly. 20 years ago, I was not who I am now. Nobody is, I said. He gave a faint, almost humorless smile. I was involved in situations I should have walked away from much earlier. He paused. One winter night, I was asked to transport a family out of the city. My chest tightened slightly. Why? Because they were in danger, he said simply. From people I was connected to at the time. The honesty in his voice made it harder to question. A man, a woman, and their daughter were supposed to meet me at a safe location. He looked away for a moment. They never arrived on time. The silence stretched between us. What happened? I asked. Damien's expression darkened slightly, not with anger but with memory. There was interference. Delays. Confusion. By the time I reached the agreed location, it was empty. My fingers instinctively found the necklace again. And the girl? I asked quietly. Damien met my eyes. I do not know what happened after that night. The words hit harder than I expected. But you think I am her? It was not a question anymore. He hesitated. I think you are the only person alive who can confirm the truth. My breathing felt shallow. That is not an answer. I know. I turned away from him, looking out at the fog-covered water. Everything inside me felt suspended. If what you are saying is true, I said slowly, then my entire life has been built on missing information. Yes. The simplicity of his response made it worse. I closed my eyes briefly. When I opened them again, something inside me had shifted. Not certainty. Not acceptance. Something closer to resolve. What do we do now? I asked. Damien stepped closer, his voice steady but quieter than before. Now we find the rest of the story. A distant foghorn echoed across the harbor. Long low. Uncertain. Just like everything else surrounding me. I looked down at the silver necklace resting against my chest. For the first time in my life, it did not feel like jewelry. It felt like a question that had finally learned how to speak. For the first time since Damien spoke the words at the harbor, I did not look at the necklace when I woke up. I actually tried not to. But avoidance is still awareness, and awareness is still connection. By the time I reached work that morning, everything felt louder. Conversations around me seemed sharper. Even the sound of pages turning in the library carried a strange weight, as if every small detail was part of something I had not yet understood. Around mid-afternoon, I found a sealed envelope waiting at the front desk. No return address. Only my name written carefully on the front. Claire Walker. My hands hesitated before opening it. Inside was a single sheet of paper and a key. The paper contained a short message. Not a question. Not an explanation. An instruction. If you want answers about the necklace, come alone. I stared at the words for a long time. The handwriting was unfamiliar, but something about the phrasing felt deliberate. Controlled. Intentional. I looked around the library. Nothing seemed unusual. People continued reading. Talking softly. existing in their normal routines. Yet I felt completely separated from all of it. That evening I told no one where I was going. Not because I did not trust anyone, but because I did not yet understand what I was walking into. The address led me to an older building, near the edge of the harbor district. It was not abandoned, but it carried the quietness of something rarely visited. The kind of place that remembers more than it reveals. I stood outside for nearly a full minute before unlocking the door with the key from the envelope. Turned easily in my hand. Inside the air was still. Dim light filtered through high windows, falling across wooden floors and scattered furniture. At the center of the room stood a single table. And behind it, Damien. "You should not have come alone," he said immediately. "Then why did you ask me to?" I replied. He did not answer right away. Instead, he gestured toward the table. On it lay multiple documents. Photographs. Maps. Old reports. My chest tightened as I approached. "What is all of this?" I asked. Damien remained still. "Everything I have been able to recover about that night." I began to look through the papers. Each one added another fragment. A timeline. A location. A witness report. A missing piece of a story that had been broken apart for 20 years. "This does not make sense," I said quietly. "It does," Damien replied. "It just does not feel complete yet." I stopped at one document. A transport record. Partial names. Redacted lines. My eyes scanned the page until something forced me to pause. A reference to a child transfer during the same storm described in the earlier reports. "This says I was moved between locations," I whispered. Damien nodded. "Yes." My voice lowered. "So I was not just lost." No, the word felt heavier than everything else. I looked up at him. Then what was I? For a moment Damien did not respond. When he finally did, his voice was quieter than before. "That is what someone wanted to erase." The room seemed to tighten around us. "Who?" I asked. Damien's expression shifted slightly, not into anger, but recognition of something dangerous in memory. "People who had reasons to make sure no one ever traced you back to where you came from." I stepped back from the table. "That sounds impossible." "It should," he said. "But it is not." My hand instinctively moved to the necklace. The silver felt colder than usual. "If everything you are saying is true," I said slowly, "then someone has been hiding my identity for my entire life." Damien met my eyes. "Yes." The silence that followed was different from before. It was no longer confusion. It was realization beginning to form its shape. I looked at the scattered documents again. At the fragments of a life I could not remember but somehow belonged to. And for the first time I understood something terrifying. The necklace was not the beginning of the story. It was the reason the story had never been allowed to end. I did not leave the building right away after reading the documents. I stayed inside that dim room longer than I should have, sitting at the edge of the table while the weight of everything slowly settled into something heavier than confusion. Damien remained standing near the far wall, watching me without pressure, without interruption, as if he understood that some truths need silence before they can be spoken. Finally, I broke it. "If someone erased my identity," I said quietly, "then why am I still alive?" The question felt simple, but the moment it left my mouth, I realized how large it truly was. Damien looked at me for a long time before answering. "Because erasing a person completely is harder than erasing their history." I let out a slow breath. "That does not make me feel better." "It is not meant to." I turned back to the table, scanning the scattered documents again. "What happens now?" Damien stepped closer, placing one more folder on top of the others. "Now you decide if you want the rest of the truth." I opened the folder. Inside was a structured timeline more complete than anything I had seen before. Hospital notes. Temporary placement records. Witness statements that had never been fully followed up. And at the center of it all, a recurring reference to a single event during a winter emergency evacuation 20 years ago. My name appeared in fragments. Not fully confirmed. Not fully denied. Just repeated in different forms, like someone had tried to write me into existence and failed halfway through. "This is not a story," I whispered. "This is a reconstruction." Damien nodded. "Yes." My hands trembled slightly as I turned another page. "Why now?" I asked. Why show me this after so many years? Damien's expression tightened briefly, like a memory pressing against something painful. Because I saw something at that event with the necklace, he said. Something I could not ignore. I looked up immediately. What did you see? He hesitated, and for the first time since I met him, he looked uncertain about how much to reveal. I saw recognition, he finally said. Not just from me. My chest tightened. From who else? Damien reached into his coat again, pulling out a second photograph. He placed it gently on the table, but did not release it immediately. There is one more person connected to that night, he said. Someone who has been missing from every record I have found. I stared at him. Who? His voice lowered slightly. The woman who was with you when everything fell apart. The room felt suddenly smaller. You are telling me I was not alone, I said. You were never alone, Damien replied. I reached forward and took the photograph. My fingers froze the moment I saw her. A woman stood in the image, holding a child close during falling snow. Her face was blurred slightly by time, but her expression was unmistakable. Fear, protection, love, and around the child's neck the same silver necklace. My breath stopped. This woman, I whispered. Who is she? Damien did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked at me with an expression that carried something heavier than explanation. That is the part of your past that was never supposed to survive. I stared at the photograph until the edges of the room began to blur. For the first time, I understood the real danger was not the missing records or the hidden names. It was the fact that someone had once tried very hard to make sure I would never remember any of it. And now, against all of that, I was remembering anyway. I did not sleep after seeing the photograph. Not because I was afraid, but because my mind refused to stop assembling pieces I had never known existed. Every fragment of the past now felt like it was shifting into place, even if I could not yet see the full image. The next morning I returned to the library again, but I could not focus on anything. Books were returned unread. Questions from visitors were answered automatically. My thoughts were somewhere else entirely. Somewhere in the snow. Somewhere 20 years ago. At midday, Damien sent a message. Not an invitation this time. A request. Come to the harbor. There is something you need to see. I left immediately. The walk to the harbor felt longer than usual, as if the city itself had expanded between where I stood and where I needed to go. When I arrived, Damien was already waiting near the water. The wind was stronger today, carrying cold air off the ocean. He did not speak until I reached him. You have seen the photograph, he said. It was not a question. Yes, I replied. He nodded slowly, as if confirming something he already feared. Then there is no way to slow this down anymore. I crossed my arms against the wind. Slow what down? Damien turned toward me, the truth coming back all at once. I looked out over the harbor, struggling to steady my thoughts. I still do not understand what happened that night. You are close, he said. Closer than I have ever been. I turned back to him. Then tell me everything. He hesitated for a long moment. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a final envelope. It looked older than the others. The edges were worn, as if it had been handled many times but never opened. He placed it into my hands. This was never supposed to leave the archive, he said quietly. My fingers tightened around it. What is inside? The complete report from that night. My heart slowed. Complete. Damien nodded. Everything that was hidden. Everything that was removed. I stared at the envelope. Why do I have it now? Because it belongs to you, he said simply. The words felt heavier than expected. I opened it slowly. Inside were pages of typed records, handwritten notes, and official documents that connected every broken fragment I had seen before into one continuous narrative. Names matched. Dates aligned. Locations confirmed each other. And at the center of it all, one repeated truth emerged with painful clarity. I was not abandoned. I was not forgotten. I was removed. My hands began to tremble as I turned the final page. A reconstruction summary described the final moments before I disappeared from official records. A coordinated relocation during emergency conditions. Multiple parties involved. and a single unresolved note written at the bottom of the page. Child transferred under protective concealment protocol pending identity confirmation. I lowered the paper slowly. My voice barely worked. They hid me. Damien did not deny it. Yes. The wind around us felt colder now. Why? I asked. The question came out softer than I intended. Damien looked at me for a long time before answering. Because someone believed you were not safe staying where you were. I closed my eyes briefly. And now? I asked. Am I safe now? Damien did not answer immediately. Instead, he looked toward the horizon where the water met the sky. Now, he said finally. You are finally in the place where the truth can find you. I stood there holding the last remaining pieces of my past, feeling the weight of a life that had been rewritten without my knowledge. And for the first time, I understood that the necklace was never just a memory. It was a key. And what it unlocked was no longer something I could avoid.